Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books, number 76. The first book today is The Lost Civilization of Lemuria, The Rise and Fall of the World's Oldest Culture by Franz Joseph, 2006. This is a really good book. The author makes the case for the existence of Lemuria, a Pacific Ocean continent that existed around 1000 BC and earlier, part of the last high age that disappeared. The study of Lemuria is only beginning. This book is a skeleton. It's all very interesting. I need to meditate to learn more, I think. Now this topic gets into a fascinating a theory of history, namely cyclical history, that the world goes through cycles of 22,000 years, 11,000 years of progress, and 11,000 years of decay. And according to this theory, today we are near the bottom of a cycle. The bottom was reached around 400 AD, but we are moving up. So about 1,600 years going upward, but coming from the bottom of a cycle. And the idea is that at the bottom of a cycle, there's so much ignorance, poverty, and depression that the knowledge of the past high cycles is forgotten. And today, most historians believe in linear history, that the farther back you go in time, the more primitive the world was. Well, cyclical history believes that if you go back in time, say 12,000 years, that the world was much, much more advanced than it is today. So it's all very interesting. Now, the Philippines, small archipelago country in Southeast Asia, some believe that it's a remnant of Lemuria. Lemuria was this big continent in the Pacific Ocean which disappeared. And now Filipinos are a very spiritual people, actually, even though they have depression, I think, from the Spanish era. But they actually are really a superior people. They're a very advanced people because they smile and they really know about the existence of God. They have some very noble qualities. So this is very interesting. It's hard to study Lemuria because of there's just most historians don't believe it existed, but I believe it did. And another example, or the counterpart of Lemuria, supposedly it was Atlantis, another continent in the Atlantic Ocean which disappeared. And supposedly the ancient Greeks were connected to that. And you think, well, the ancient Greeks were so talented, incredibly talented. Where did that come out of? It's like it came out of nowhere. Well, it didn't come out of nowhere. They were connected to this high civilization, which also disappeared. So it's all very interesting. What this world is, we believe in my church, Self-Realization Fellowship, that the world goes through these cycles, and maybe it's not that important. I think it's interesting as a historian. In fact, if you watch the TV show Ancient Aliens, it's all about these anomalies that they keep coming up with, existence of things which contradict historical beliefs, things that they can't explain. Well, to me, and the TV show says, well, it's because of ancient aliens that were advanced bringing these things. And my opinion that these anomalies that they find for things which appear to be very advanced from the distant past, this is proof, or actually a proof of the existence of a past high age. And basically, historians have the wrong theory. They're trying to fit information into a wrong theory, which is that the farther back in time we go, the more primitive the world is, and they have all these things which contradict that. Well, the theory is wrong. If you get the right theory that the world actually beyond 400 AD was actually going up, and the world was more advanced, well, then these things make sense, these so-called anomalies. So it's very interesting. And it gives hope for the world that since we're, according to this theory, we're moving toward a high age, another high age, we're moving up, and right now going through a very tough time in the world because technology has advanced, and we're misusing technology, so we're kind of deteriorating because of the misuse of technology. And what's needed today, the tremendous need, is for spiritual change, so that we can stop hurting each other with, like military technology. We're using television often for degeneration. So it's interesting, and but according to this theory, there's a positive future if you believe in reincarnation and life after death, and we'll come back. The next lives, if we're not liberated, our next lives in this world will be better because the world will be improved. There will be more kindness, more wisdom, and people will be because people will treat each other better. Today, there's a lot of we are all children of God. We're all brothers and sisters, but we don't act like that. But as we move forward, this will become more true. And I think Filipinos actually are playing a major role in the evolution of the world, and I think the United States as well. Fascinating book, about Lemuria. The next book is The Templars, Piers Paul Reed, 1999. Very interesting book. It's the story of the Knights Templars, a Catholic order of priest soldiers from around 1110 to 1310, involved in the Crusades, fighting Muslims, ruling Jerusalem, and places along the pilgrimage route from Europe to Jerusalem. They were good guys. They were destroyed by a French king who wanted to acquire their property. Very sad. They were soldiers and priests. Real interesting. Basically, the Templars were these guys, Christians in Europe wanted to travel, some of them, pilgrimage is this idea of traveling to a holy city for your religion. And in the case of Christians, Jerusalem, where Jesus died, and where he was crucified. So, and then of course Jerusalem in Israel became a part of was ruled by Muslims, so then became problematic, and so there was the issue: how can European Christians travel to Jerusalem? And this was the role of the Knights Templars, since they were priests and soldiers to defend the pilgrims from attack from whoever, from different lawless people along the way. So, and it was very tragic. They were betrayed and denounced, and all these lies were made up about them just to destroy their reputation and end their existence, and like I said, to get their property. All very, very, very depressing, but also inspiring. Because they were good guys. They did a good job in serving God and helping Christian pilgrims to get to the Holy Land safely and home. The next book is RG3, The Promise, by Dave Sheinin, 2013. This is the story of Robert Griffin III, the famous athlete from Texas, Heisman Trophy winner at Baylor, and NFL rookie phenom in 2012 with the Washington Redskins. He was a track star, a running quarterback, had a lot of injuries, unfortunately, and then he was playing for Cleveland Browns for 1 year, had a tough year, so I'm not sure if he's still in the NFL, so hopefully he can turn things around. I wish him well. RG3, Robert Griffin III. The next book is Churchill, a Biography by Roy Jenkins, 2001. This book has 912 pages. Golly. Winston Churchill, an amazing man. Great Britain's prime minister during the dark days of the Second World War. The man who defied Adolf Hitler. Churchill was smart, hard-working, strong-spirited, brave, strong-willed, funny, interesting. He was very outspoken and made enemies easily, but was forgiven due to his genius and his endearing personality. He loved to travel. A very strong anti-communist, yet he liked Joseph Stalin, probably maybe the worst, along with Mao Zedong, communist leader. Winston Churchill was forever organizing meetings with Stalin and Franklin D. Roosevelt, the U.S. president, later Harry Truman, U.S. president. He enjoyed the good life in his final years, going on cruises on Aristotle Onassis' yacht. Aristotle Onassis, of course, who married John F. Kennedy's widow, Jackie Kennedy. So Churchill was prime minister the second time, past age 80. This is a very inspiring book. His speeches rallied his country, Great Britain, to fight Nazi Germany. Now, one of the great people in history. During the Second World War, it really looked like these evil forces could very easily conquer the world. Evil forces that had taken over Germany and Japan, and in Churchill's case, in Europe. And the conquest actually almost looked like the Germans, actually, Nazi Germany, conquered all of Europe. except for Great Britain. And, the British were feeling pretty bad and looked like, wow, what are we going to do? And a lot of people wanted to negotiate with Hitler, like, okay, we can't fight this guy because he's conquered all of continental Europe. But Churchill said no. He was a fighter, and his fighting spirit inspired the British people and inspired the Allies to eventually defeat Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany, which was so important because it was such the Nazis were such an evil political force. So he had a famous speech on June 6, 1944, after the invasion of Normandy, when finally the ground war started in the West, when the Allied forces invaded France at the Normandy coastline. And Churchill reportedly said, "This is not the end, nor is it the beginning of the end. It is the end, but it is the end of the beginning." So he was really something. Very brave. He shows the importance of courage, and we don't value courage today enough. It's an important quality, because without courage, evil will conquer. And I thought it was so interesting how much he enjoyed organizing meetings with Joseph Stalin. Actually, from the very beginning, when the Russian Revolution broke out, Winston Churchill was not fooled. He was one of the earliest anti-communist people in the world, and who thought, no, this is no good what the Russians are doing. So one tremendous. So he was probably the strongest anti-communist, but he also loved meeting with Joseph Stalin. Well, partly because Stalin was the leader of the Soviet Union, and he was trying to negotiate with them. You have to deal. Stalin was powerful. Diplomacy was needed to meet with him, especially fighting in Germany during the war, and then afterward, when they trying to prevent nuclear war after the Russians had developed the atomic bomb and nuclear bomb. So they had one meeting where Stalin made this joke, or somebody was talking about, I can't remember the details, but Stalin said something like, "Oh, you just need to kill all those people." And of course, in a democracy, you don't just kill people. And Churchill was outraged, and he marched. He left the room furious, with this brutality. And later, Stalin startled him, came up to him, gave him a hug, and laughed. So Stalin was pretty terrible man, but for some reason, he also he was powerful and he had charisma. So Churchill was attracted to him, or enjoyed their get-togethers and trying to do good. Well, in Churchill's case, to try to do good for the world, for Great Britain, for the West. So this is really an amazing book. I had a day. It was winter time, and my wife Alice and son Tim were visiting, and I wanted to finish this book, and I did. I spent the whole day reading the final 100 pages, because very inspiring. Winston Churchill. Really, this book, I highly recommend it. The next book is Mao, The Unknown Story by Jung Chang and John Halliday, 2005. This book has 616 pages. Wow, what a book. The biography of Mao Zedong, father of communist China, who ruled China from 1949 to 1976. He was responsible for the deaths of 70 million Chinese. 70 million from starvation and murder. He was a very terrible man, whom maybe the most evil man in history, whom even worse than Stalin, whom Western leftists, including some of my relatives, consider a great man. Millions of Chinese starved because food was exported by China to buy military stuff from Europe. Mao Zedong was a cruel, heartless man. He wanted the Chinese people to be his mindless slaves. To a large extent, he succeeded. His crimes are still hidden. He's quoted in the Philippines as an authority figure. Very troubling. He promoted the Korean War to get military supplies from the Soviet Union. So this book has other characters, include Chiang Kai-shek, whom he fought in the Chinese Civil War, Joseph Stalin, who was his comrade in arms, the leader of the Soviet Union, Zhou Enlai, who was one of his top people who helped him a lot. He was actually a good guy. Richard Nixon, who, Mao famously met when Nixon opened relations with China. What an incredibly tragic story. Mao Zedong tried to eliminate culture in China. He eliminated books, plays, movies, music, fashion, and comedy. He took everything away from the Chinese people not that long ago. And up till now, most people don't know how bad he was. There's general knowledge of that he was in power, for a long time, for 27 years. But people really don't know how bad he was. And yeah, there are the folks on the radical leftists or on the left who actually believe in him. And the thing is, the Chinese never denounced Mao, unlike the Russians. When Nikita Khrushchev denounced, after the death of Joseph Stalin, I believe in the late 50s, he publicly condemned Stalin for his crimes, which actually undermined the authority of the Soviet Union, eventually led to the fall of the Soviet Union. Now, the Chinese, I think, kind of learned from that. And up till now, you have in China a dictatorship of the Communist Party. And so the truth of if the truth of Mao Zedong was known, they believe it would undermine their authority. They are not elected by the general public. It is a dictatorship. So they do not want the truth of how bad Mao was known. Now, after he died, things in China really changed for the better. There was this Deng Xiaoping was his successor, who really did a lot of good. And of course, today China is a much, much better country. Still, they do not have political freedom. They are not a democracy, but of course there's tremendous economic opportunity, and they basically are a capitalist country. So they're really not, you can't really say they're a communist country anymore, although the Communist Party does have total political control. And that is problematic. I met this guy who was working for democracy in China. He believes that China is a threat to world peace as a dictatorship, because dictators are very often, they screw up, they're not accountable, and then they often start wars to deflect attention from themselves and their mistakes and their misrule. And of course, China now is a military power. It's changed dramatically in recent decades from it was a very poor country back in the in the early 20th century up until into the 70s, and things started changing in the 80s, and now it's they've really had tremendous economic growth in China. But this is just unbelievable, the suffering. And actually the Chinese people really are a traumatized people. If you think of 70 million Chinese starving to death or being murdered by their government in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, this is a horrifically traumatic. And so, and this is important to know because it has an effect on culture. So, and it needs to be acknowledged. And I really give a lot of credit to these two authors, Jung Chang and John Halliday, for bringing this to light. Like I said, I have a relative who's I showed him this book, and he said, "Oh, it's not true," and because he's a leftist, and there are leftists who will have you believe or try to convince you that Mao Zedong was a great man. No, not true. I mean, he took everything away from the Chinese people in his drive to militarize China and for his enjoyment of power. Plain and simple, took everything away. And so the whole idea of the Chinese revolution, they did not create an ideal society. And when in the Tiananmen Square revolution, there is knowledge of this in China, but you don't talk about it. And in 1989, when there was the movement for democracy in China, this one guy, at one point, a guy threw red paint. There's still a large statue of Mao in Tiananmen Square. And then the government cracked down, and up till now, they still, even though I think people know inside China, they have an idea of what Mao did, but they don't want this known, and I think it's important for people to know because if 70 million people, those lives need to be acknowledged, and we need to learn from history. We can't learn if we don't know what happened, and the story of Mao Zedong is not well known by the public or by people around the world. The next book is Genghis Khan, Life, Death, and Resurrection by John Mann, 2004. This is a good book. It's hard to study a guy who lived 800 years ago, Genghis Khan. Yeah, so he was living in the, I think, the 1100s or into the 1200s. Was he a hero or a villain? A man who committed genocide and mass murder. A man who built a vast empire which allowed trade, travel, and communication between Europe and the Far East. He promoted religious freedom. He's claimed by Mongolia and China. The author spent time in Mongolia searching for Genghis's tomb. Actually, the Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia today, the international airport is Genghis Khan International Airport. During the communist era, the communists were worried that the knowledge of his life would inspire the Mongolians to fight for freedom, fight for democracy, and especially I believe that Mongolia was it was a you could say an independent country, but under Chinese influence, and the Chinese did not want. They didn't want the Mongolians to really know much about Genghis Khan. But now that things have changed, I believe Mongolia is independent now, and so they are promoting the life of Genghis Khan. Now, the thing that's hard to... People look at him and, yeah, he would... The Mongols were a terrifying force. They expanded. They created a huge empire, the largest, largest empire on land, which was one piece of land. All of Russia and all of China was a part of the Mongol Empire and into Europe. The Mongols would come and they'd kill. According to the stories, they'd kill everybody or kill all the men, and a lot of the women were raped and so forth. And so this was devastating. They say that some people say that the Russian people never recovered from Mongol rule, from the terror that the Mongols brought, and that's why they became so passive in accepting the crimes of the Soviet Union government, which was so horrific, because the Russians kind of had a sense of being powerless because from the Mongol experience. And I know the Mongols devastated Baghdad up till now. Baghdad, capital of Iraq, never recovered from the devastation of the Mongols. I have friends who are Hungarians. They're very proud because the Hungarians stopped the Mongol invasion of Europe. And now the thing is, yes, we know that all these, they killed a lot of people during their conquests, but there's the good part is that once their empire was created, you could travel the distance. So you could travel from Europe to China, all the way to the Chinese coast to the Pacific Ocean, safely. So they created a place that was safe to travel. Now, before the Mongols, you couldn't travel from Europe to the Far East because it wasn't safe. You'd be attacked by bandits and, you'd be robbed and killed and so forth. So they created safety. So that was the good part of the Mongol Empire. And so this was, you could say, part of the evolution of the world toward one world, and it led to guys like Marco Polo traveling to the Far East and bringing back knowledge of Asia. So this was, from that standpoint, a positive thing. The Mongol Empire facilitated trade and information passing between Europe and Asia. So from that standpoint, Genghis Khan did a good thing. And so it's all very interesting. And again, it's hard to study Genghis Khan's because it's so long ago. And I found this. Maybe I'll try to find another biography of Genghis Khan. He's famous. People, and supposedly 8% of Asians are descendants of maybe it's less descendants of Genghis Khan because he impregnated so many women. And it's an interesting story, and definitely someone worth studying more, and real interesting. And like I said, so he did create a big empire, and there were positive aspects to it, namely trade between East and West. And Europeans got to learn more about Asia because of the Mongol Empire. The next book is Images of Rocky River, Ohio, by Carol Lestock, 2002. This is a book of photographs from Rocky River, Ohio, USA history. the Detroit Road Bridge, the Cleveland Yachting Club, the Beechcliff development. The best part was a photograph of the 1948 Rocky River Pirates football team, Southwestern Conference champions, including Bud Kinsley, the father of John Kinsley and grandfather of Joseph and Joey and Johnny Kinsley. Friends of our family. Penguin Ice Cream Store up on Center Ridge, the Beechcliff Movie Theater. Yeah, so this is about my hometown. I grew up in Rocky River. It's interesting to go back in time and see how this town, where I'm actually living right now, it sort of, you could say, it was developed in the 1920s. It originally had been farmland. Well, originally it was forested, and then they started building orchards here. It was kind of a resort town for a while from Cleveland. When folks wanted to get out of Cleveland, they'd come here, I think, to the Rocky River itself, Rocky River Valley. And then the Westlake Hotel was built. Some famous people, Amelia Earhart and Charles Lindbergh, famous aviators, stayed there. And then eventually it became a real nice suburb, which was developed for people who did well financially in Cleveland. Early on in Cleveland, here in Cleveland, Ohio, these cities were pretty cramped, and so if you did well financially, you get a house in the suburbs and work in Cleveland and drive back and forth, commute to work, and it is, the lots are bigger. You have more room, and unlike in Cleveland, which was pretty congested. So this is a good history book of Rocky River, Ohio, USA, my hometown. The next book is The Duke of Cleveland by Les Roberts, 1995. This is number 6 in the Milan Yakovich series. These are novels. The Slovenian-American private investigator in Cleveland, Ohio. It's a murder mystery with references to the 1995 Cleveland Indians, their second year at Jacobs Field. During our, during 1995, we had kind of a tough year for Resalest Educational Center. So I enjoy these books. Because they're interesting. They're novels set in Cleveland, Ohio, and I love the references to Cleveland sports. And this character, he's an endearing guy. He's a good guy, and going about his business in the Cleveland area, trying to crack this investigation that he's working on, which is generally a murder mystery. So interesting book, this Les Roberts, this character and these novels that he writes about. The next book is Monster of the Midway, Bronco Nagurski, and the 1943 Chicago Bears and the Greatest Comeback Ever by Jim Dent, 2003. I really enjoyed this book. Plenty of 1930s National Football League information. Red Grange, who was the hero of my father's father, Doran Ray, back in the 20s, who was a college football star at the University of Illinois and then played for the Chicago Bears. Bronco Nagurski, George Halas, the owner of the Chicago Bears. Curly Lambeau, who was actually the creator of the Green Bay Packers. That's why they call it Lambeau Field. George Preston Marshall, owner of the Washington Redskins. Sid Luckman was a quarterback. Sammy Baugh, the Bears against the Packers, their rivalry. The old days. So this is some really good NFL history. And I really enjoy it. Bronco Nagurski, he was a famous guy, and my father used to talk about him. Real big, strong fella, and one of the star players in the NFL. And I think that the Bears won the 1943 NFL title under his leadership. It appears we're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Hope you find a good history book to read. There's so many out there that you can, if you look for and find one you can enjoy. God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.